Vocation. The opening is in Nez Perce language, which is my grandmother's language, although I'm enrolled with Umatilla through my father's family, and my mother's family is Coeur d'Alene. Tatsme or Tatskalap, good day. Katsiao, thank you for giving us this day, one of 3 sessions to share ideas and knowledge. Thanks and appreciation for all the work and preparation in this workshop. The purpose of our tribal blessings and thoughts is to provide a transition point for our minds, our hearts, to step into a new time and grow together to a new community. This special blessing and transition is to provide hope to mend our forests, range, grasslands, and people with connecting the Western science and traditional knowledge from thousands of years of symbiotic relationships and languages. Today, a new journey starts with caretakers listening throughout the sessions. We are seeking to ask successful questions for the many answers that are needed to mend our dynamic communities. We have a wonderful opportunity to start our journey as a caretaker, and in the end of our 3 sessions, we can return to our communities and share our new gifts of knowledge and create a better society. Katsiayo, thank you for giving us day together.
Thank you, Don. Tom, you want to give us a welcome from the College of Forestry?
There we go. Yes, thank you, Klaus, and thank you, Don. That was very nice. First of all, welcome everybody. It's really wonderful to have the opportunity to do a brief welcome. My name is Tom DeLuca. I'm the Dean of the College of Forestry here at OSU. As Peter and I were talking earlier, you might have heard that I'm a forest soil scientist by training and or a soil scientist by training, and have focused much of my career on studying the role of fire and other disturbances in soil biota and their response and that influence on ecosystem function. So the content of this summit today is of a great deal of interest to me for multiple reasons. But as you all know, we're facing some really extreme set of challenges that are pushing our limits in terms of our capacity to respond. And in many ways, climate change has been a wake-up call and has set the stage for our need to seek management approaches that maximize resilience in the face of these shifting climatic conditions. So whether it's the increased occurrence of drought or increased length of fire season, species extirpation, or increased disease severity or insect outbreak severity, we have this, culmination of issues that are facing us as land managers. And so that makes a summit like this exceptionally important given this backdrop of these challenges that we face. And at the core of this summit, in terms of the title of it, are 2 things in particular: innovation and forestry. And innovation, of course, is an application of creativity to invention, to create something new that has social and economic value. And creativity and innovation are really keys to our ability to survive as a species. And so it's nice to see innovation front and center. And then forestry, of course, is the other key term. And forestry is it was the conservation answer to forest resource extraction of the 1800s. In other words, the cut-out, get-out logging of the 1800s, and forestry was introduced as the U.S. governance response to that cut-out, get-out logging. And American forestry, though, is really unique in that it's directly informed by the millennia of indigenous years of indigenous land management and their expert use of fire that shaped the forests that Europeans found when they arrived here. That wasn't a mistake. That was a product of very thoughtful and consistently applied management and use of fire. So it's highly appropriate that there's such a significant portion of this summit that's devoted to fire and to Indigenous knowledge. I really appreciate and applaud that. And really today, our hope moving forward with achieving a more sustainable forestry is through the lens of that millennia of Indigenous years of Indigenous management that led to the conditions that were found when Europeans arrived here. It's like our benchmark that we seek to re-achieve. The purpose of this summit is to provide a venue for sharing and learning from innovative landowners and managers to further advance a more sustainable approach to forestry. And this role of ecological forestry operations in the PNW has been getting more attention in the past few decades, but really not fully appreciated for all of its ecological, social, and economic contributions to the region. As an outgrowth of the Northwest Forest Plan, ecological forestry has gained some traction, but it has been relatively slow. But regardless, quite a few private and public landowners have been applying ecological forestry principles for a while, and we're going to be hearing from some of those folks over the next few sessions. So this summit is this wonderful opportunity for OSU and other institutions to gain a better understanding of the whole breadth of innovation that's being applied by these landowners and managers. We hope to build on that and move forestry operations forward to ensure a more sustainable production of wood products and non-wood forest products at meeting social, ecological, and economic objectives. Just glancing at the agenda, this conference is addressing some really key topical areas, including prescribed fire and Indigenous use of fire and broader application of traditional ecological knowledge, non-timber forest products, wood products with higher embodied carbon, water quality, and of course, innovative silviculture. Just a couple of examples of activities from OSU, and of course, there's a pretty rich tradition from OSU that had been applied over the years, whether Brenda McComb and Norm Johnson, Jerry Franklin, John Tavernier are a few names that come to mind that have been critical in setting up research and demonstration studies in the 90s, providing scientific backing of ecological and alternative forestry operations. And whether that's College of Forestry Integrative Research Project on the McDonald Dun, or the Young Stand Thinning and Diversity Study on the Willamette National Forest, and the Density Management Study on BLM lands, and others, including like Demo, have been just wonderful examples of investigation into alternative forest practices that can help guide us forward. The Hayes family, and of course Peter is here today, provided OSU with the funds for an endowed Edmund Hayes Professorship in Silviculture, and that's currently held by Klaus Putman, who's of course with us in the organizer today. And Klaus hopes to build on that growth in ecological silviculture and expand those efforts. And there's so much more that I could share with regard to what's going on at OSU and that has relevance and application here, but this isn't really about OSU. It's about innovation and about innovative land managers and past and present, and landowners and managers. And it's about sharing and working together to come up with better approaches to forestry and forest management. And so I hugely applaud this effort, and I'm really happy that OSU is one of the organizers of this effort. And I'd also like to give a shout out and thanks to the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences at Washington, Northwest Natural Resource Group, Forest Stewards Guild, and the Intertribal Timber Council as supporters of this event. So with that, Klaus, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tom. That was really nice, and it makes, I think, my job here a little easier. I just want to give a few more backgrounds and thanks to some people. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, a group of us got together and ended up organizing what now is the Northwest Innovative Forestry Summit. And this was a group that was interested in forest management that provided a more balanced set of ecosystem services, or I guess as the Forest Stewardship Guild writes, ecologically, economically, and socially responsible forestry. And as Tom mentioned, there was, there is, at least in our mind, a lack of recognition. And that lack kind of is a hindrance and prevents really forestry from making the full contribution that it could make to the region on that. So I just want to name the people that were involved in this and give them thanks for that. The organizations are listed. Tom already mentioned it. The Forest Steward Guild, specifically Colleen Robinson, Amanda Maffei, and Mara Olivos, were really critical here. Don MOTANIC represents the Intertribal Timber Council and already read us in the blessing. And NRG, Rowan Baybrook is the major contributor. Shannon Murray and myself, we are the Beavers. Greg Edel is the Husky, and Peter Hayes is a family forester from Highland Woods. So we picked these 3 topics to start at our summit, but as Tom already hinted, this is part of a longer effort that has a long history to it, and I'm keeping it short here. Is we really want to carry the discussion past the summit into the future. On that, there are some ongoing activities after the summit. Future summits are on the horizon, hopefully in person at the time. But this is really a first step, and our goal is really to build a community of foresters interested in the ecological sound forest management, interested in innovation. So just quickly here, I mapped out our experience class or age class distribution, so to speak. We have 180 participants on it, and you can see here a little over 20 in the seed category. We peak in the overstory category at 50 some, and then a few people in the old growth category on that. And the participants represent a huge variety of landowners, both private and public, educational research institutions, NGOs, trusts, agencies at various levels, too many to really list. So when I look at this as a size distribution and I think about the diversity of people participant, that's a stand structure and a stand composition I can work with. That's set up to be resilient. That's set up to be adaptive. So there is really an opportunity for novelty and innovation with this group that we have here today. So if you have not, actually, before I say that, I need to mention this session will be recorded. So be aware of that, and we'll make that recording available. If you have not yet, if you hover the mouse over your Zoom name and right-click on it, you can rename yourself, and we'd appreciate it if you put your full name and your association there. So this really helps our communication on it. I'm not sure I need to go through all this in detail here. I guess you've been in that. Please mute yourself during the presentation. Really important to use the chat room. We have several people monitor the chat room for questions or for comments on that. I'll keep it simple. Oops, I guess I'll keep it simple in terms of being respectful, respect the diversity, be interested in learning, allow other people to speak, and most important, to carry over from my class, make sure we have fun. So Colleen will now take us and explain just a little bit about Mighty Network, which is the system we use as a communication tool.
Thank you, Klaus. Welcome, everybody. This is so exciting. There's so many of us here gathered, and as he mentioned, many different experience levels or time in forestry related field here represented today. Lots of different forestry sectors, landowners, students, and we wanted to have a way for this conversation and collaboration among everybody participating today to be able to continue after the summit. This is only until Thursday evening, so what do we do then? And so this Mighty Network has been set up. Many of you are in it already. We have about 70 members of the summit in it already, so thanks for going there and checking it out. The rest of you all have invitations to join. And it's really a space, again, for us to be able to connect in a time where we're still affected by COVID and facing unprecedented opportunities and challenges related to climate and economy and equity in forestry and beyond. So it's a space for us to collaborate, share stories and questions, ideas and support over time. You can help us build and decide what the next summit looks like and what kinds of things we can do together in between now and then to really help move innovative forestry forward in the region together. We'll get into a little bit more about Mighty Networks during the summit, on Mighty Networks, and potentially after the summit if there's interest. But this is just one page that shows you some of the things you can navigate on the left-hand side. There'll be articles when we post questions to you or polls on the network. They'll show up in featured items. Klaus, you want to go to the next screen? Under topics, we have different topics that you can follow and comment on. There's resources in each of these topics. Over time, the community on the Mighty Network will be able to suggest topics, and we can really make this space our own and built by the community. So we encourage your engagement, your questions, your ideas for this. It's not a product that we've put together and it's a full deliverable. It is really us learning right along with you and a space to build together. So thanks for joining that if you have already, and consider it if you haven't.
Thank you, Colleen. So I'll hand it over to Don, who's going to lead us through the presentation and through the rest of the day. So Don, I'll leave this up till the presentations, until you start your presentation.
I'm getting a message that says you cannot start screen while the others participate is sharing.
All right. Okay, try now. Sorry.
How about now? Is it up?
No, I don't see.
No, it's not done.
Let me hit the start share again. How about now?
Oh, you got it.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Today we're going to have the session titled Transformed by Flame and Forest, People and Fire. It's about providing some background knowledge from tribal perspective on fire. We have 3 presentations today given by myself, Don MOTANIC, and Tribal Fire and Traditional Knowledge. After that, it'll be 15 minutes, and then at 4:35 we'll end and have a 5-minute question and answer. And then after I'm completed, we'll have COLBY Drake make a presentation from Grand Ronde. And COLBY grew up in the Umpqua Valley in Southern Oregon. His first job during the summer was a youth crew, brushing roads and fighting fire. And that's something that's interesting. All 3 of us, COLBY, myself, and Phil, have been involved as firefighters starting out our career. After finishing his education at Western Oregon University, he worked as a technician, as a silviculturist and firefighter, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Interdisciplinary Studies. And now he's moved up and he's a interim natural resource director for the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. And he'll be making a presentation about the Grand Ronde program. After Colby is done, then we'll move on to the next presentation for Yakama Nation, Phil Rigdon, Deputy Director for the Department of Natural Resources. I've known Phil for quite a while. His background, as I mentioned, was in a firefighter also, but received his forestry degree at University of Washington, and then received his master's degree at Yale University, and has been, besides providing leadership for the Yakama Nation, he's also been past president for the Intertribal Timber Council and has provided lots of great testimony for Congress, and actually has really been helpful with developing and assisting with things like the Tribal Forest Protection Act and the latest Farm Bill of 2018. So with myself and two other presenters, you should get a diverse perspective on our transformation of flames and fire. And we'll have some, I'll go into my presentation and it'll get more into some of the questions. Tribal fire and traditional knowledge. Why are we interested? To find a place with tribal fire and traditional conversations in a manner that's in a respectful manner, even as a non-native person. After the sessions today, you may start out as a seed, but maybe after these presentations, you may move up to a seedling. I always feel like I'm a seedling, even with my tribal background, and I'm always learning. Another question after the sessions today, can you feel like you can transfer information to cohorts about the tribal challenges? So yes or no? Did you learn something today? And then third one, you feel more comfortable when addressing tribal government and culture. That's something in today's society and the challenges of our Euro-American cultures with people of color, indigenous people. For me, it's always interesting making presentations. And I always explain that it's almost like racial and cultural wellness, that if you go bicycling one day, you're using your muscles in your calves, and if you go skiing another day, you're using your quad muscles, and you use different muscles for different exercises, and it's healthy to use these different muscles. And it's also with your mind and your emotions, that you use different muscles in your mind, that is just not one culture, but you're using another cultural muscle in your mind, and it's just a more healthy aspect is kind of been my viewpoint, or how I feel like I explain things with our tribal culture and tribal government. And this is one of my favorite sayings, is where common memory is lacking. I've got to move where common memory is lacking, where people do not share the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created. And that's from George Erasmus, an Aboriginal leader from Canada. So we have kind of a Western science memory, but today we'll have some of the tribal community to help with the memory. My own family connections with science and technical and traditional knowledge. As I mentioned before, my family background is Umatilla, Coeur d'Alene, and French. And I did receive my degree from the University of Washington in forest engineering back in 1978. But before that career, I was 2 years old back in 1956 when our family brought me up. Families gathered in the Sawtooth Mountain berry fields, where after the fires and 1911, there was 38,000 acres of berry fields. Phil might mention this before, but the fires were not only used for clearing land, but also actually preserving our huckleberries in this sawtooth. This is Surprise Lakes area back in the 1930s. And you notice the females and the children. And this is back 1960s, where our family, you can kind of see what the landscape looks like between 1936 and 1965. But also in these gatherings of just picking berries, there was family stories that were told in campments, family campments, where we gathered. This was back in the 1950s, and also bring our daughters up there, 50 years later, 2007. And one of the things that they understand, and as you can even see in the pictures, it's interesting that the females were really directing the camps and even how we collected and harvested. They were in charge of the harvest because there would be different varieties of huckleberries throughout the various berry fields, and they would make sure that we had these berries sorted because they provided different antioxidants. Is what, some of the berries provided better jams, some of them was better for pies, and we had to sort those berries, and then we would can them and put the labels on the mason jars to make sure we had the different berries when we stored them over time. And why are we interested with traditional knowledge? There's been lots of growth. Sarah Hoagland, an article that I did send out, she has an interesting graph illustrating the increasing number of articles by Google Scholar with the exact phrase, traditional knowledge. You can see starting in 2000, there was about 1,000 articles, and then within 10 years, it's almost 6,000 articles, and this interest with traditional knowledge is growing exponentially. Traditional knowledge is the knowledge that's derived from or is rooted in the traditional ways of life of Aboriginal people. It's that acclimated knowledge and understanding of the human place and relationship to the universe. Integration with Western science knowledge systems. This one, I sent out an article talking about the gift economy versus the market economy, reciprocity versus receipts. A gift economy or gift culture is a mode of exchange where valuables are not traded or sold, but rather given without an explicit agreement for immediate or future reward. Don't expect to be thanked for being a tribal leader is what I was told about when I was 30 years old, when I was forest manager back at Umatilla as a young manager. A barter economy or market economy where goods and services are primarily explicitly exchanged for value received, a receipt. The gift economy, I sent out some articles by Robin Kimmer, which these articles are in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. The gift economy and market economy is one of the ideas, one of the main ideas to get across in this presentation, to see the challenges that we have as tribal people work in these two different worlds. The second one is dealing with a different language base, our tribal language base. So when you read in Robin's book, she talks about this and highlights that in the English language, 70% noun, 30% verb. In our tribal language, it's 70% verb, 30% noun. So you can see that the value system, we almost have to flip the interpretation between English and tribal languages. And there's 200 tribal languages in the United States. And the language also views things as a subject instead of an object. Europeans are viewed as a subject, not from this land, versus an object, a white person, a black person. But in the tribal language, there's a virtual or a value explained. In the Spokane tribal story about a word suyapi, like in Yakama, it's kind of an essay, shoyapo. The suyapi in the tribal Spokane tribal story, and it's the word for hat, but in the tribal story, it talks about upside down hat. European people were from another land, is how the story goes, a short version of the story. The other thing, kind of show you a verb, even with our Nez Perce language, when you're asking for salt in the tribal language, the literal translation is actually called mixer, and for pepper, it's called stunner. So that's one thing that they give you an illustration of how the language is a verb instead of a noun. With tribal fire and traditional knowledge, showing this photograph on the left is prescribed fire with Harold Weaver on the Colville Reservation. This is back in 1943. Tribes were, even though other federal agencies had a lack of prescribed fire, but even back in the 40s, they were doing prescribed fires on the reservations. And also there's been a rebirth of cultural burning, just like I showed with the traditional knowledge interest in research. Prescribed fire versus cultural burn, what are the differences? With a prescribed fire, you might be looking at fuel reduction. With a cultural, you flip it. Human services for ecosystem is something that Bill Tripp from the Croup tribe has been quoted to say. Instead of ecosystem for human services with fuel reductions, a cultural burn is human services for the ecosystem. And again, receipts for humans. And with a cultural burn, it's reciprocity for Earth's gifts. With prescribed fire, there's a linear model. With cultural burn, there's a process of the hero's story. There's a story arc with action, emotional beat, and then sharing the gift. And the emotional beat is the part with ceremony and song that it provides inspiration as you're doing your cultural burn. And it shows you a reason why, that you wonder why there are these ceremonies. It's part of the emotional beat. Another example of stories, even in our movies, you'll hear an emotional beat that you can almost hear one line out of a movie and it explains the whole movie. Like if you've, of course, many people have seen the movie Jaws. When you say something like, we're gonna need a bigger boat, you definitely know that's the emotional beat of the movie Jaws. Thus, the integration of the two knowledges faces a number of barriers, a different perspective. There is frequently a distinct difference in what Indigenous people think are significant impacts and what policymakers and those favored developments think are significant. These differences are probably rooted in both the mind and practical priorities of each group. Policymakers may resist altering decision-making processes to accommodate to the use of traditional knowledge, reasoning to having to do with an interest in controlling the process. Integration of Western science systems. This particular table is from Burke's. One of the things that you look at the bottom, there's a description of time, the difference of time between Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge, diachronic and synchronic. And I always have tribal people or tribal elders will ask me, what do those words mean? To a researcher, they might make sense, but to a tribal elder, you try to explain what do these words actually mean. So when I thought about it, time, for Indigenous knowledge, time is the significance of an event, and the most significant event starts with, for zero for tribal knowledge, it starts with the creation story. And in Western science, time is a unit of measure. It usually starts with a with a number. So today, today that's the three things that I've talked about as far as memory of the reciprocity gift economy versus a market economy, how our language is different in many ways, 180 degrees, and the challenge that we have of connecting these two thoughts, and even how our cultural burning is different from some of the prescribed burning. Those are some of the memories I hope I shared today. Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created. And in the end, why are we interested? And I hope you found a place in the tribal fire and traditional knowledge conversation in a respectful manner, even as a non-native person, feel like you can feel like you can transfer information to your cohorts about the tribal challenges of our gift economy and our tribal language, and the difference between our prescribed fires and cultural fires, and feel more comfortable when addressing tribal government and culture. You're able to use your different muscles for your racial and cultural wellness. So Katsiayo, thank you. And any questions?
Thank you, Don. I don't see any questions in the chat room. I want to remind people, write your question in the chat room. At this stage, I guess I'll take advantage of the opportunity. And I've been wondering, I guess, two things, Don. How homogeneous is this attitude across the tribes, whether in the Pacific Northwest or in the greater Americas? And the second part, why is it so different from the, well, European viewpoint? You know, I mean, even the Epic of Gilgamesh, so it's way before religion really came into play. There was clearly a different attitude towards nature than you described the indigenous tribes had in North America.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that a lecture, there's a Starker lecture that I give, and you look at how forestry was developed with Gifford Pinchot, that he actually uses, you can look at a Bible quote, Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, humans shall rule over the fish in the sea, basically control. And the founding fathers used that particular Bible verse quite a bit in setting up our federal government. And then Gifford Pinchot uses it when you look at the first duty of the human race is to control nature, you know, is what he wrote. And then also you even look at the definition of silviculture is the art and science of controlling the forest. This word control is used throughout, and then I showed in that slide about the word control versus with tribal folks, it's a symbiotic, that trees have a spirit, animals have a spirit, that you share the same we share the same earth. So that's why there's this reciprocity versus looking at something as an object without any spirit. So that's why it's treated almost as an equal, you know, with a soul. You know, that's the rhythm of the beat, you know, why the tribal songs and the language is so unique with each. When you were talking about homogeneous, it's all in the 200 languages, and probably 200 different creation stories is represent each bioregion in a sense.
Great. I think to stay on time, Don, you want to, I think Colby is next. You want to introduce him?
Yes, our next speaker is Colby Drake, the interim natural resource director, And if we were the audience, I would say, would you please join me in welcoming Colby? All right, here we go.
Welcome everybody. Hope you guys can hear me all right and make sure my screen's being shared correctly. You guys see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
All right, excellent. Yeah, thank you, Don, and thank you everybody for the invitation and the opportunity to present today at the Northwest Innovative Forestry Summit. It's definitely an honor to see a lot of the presenter names and seeing the names of the people who are here in the audience today on the Zoom call. Really appreciate this opportunity. Like Don mentioned, I come from a background, I'm a tribal member here in Grand Ronde. My family is mostly Cree, Umpqua, Chinook, and French, similar to Don's situation there. And yeah, grew up in Southern Oregon, went to school here in Western Oregon near Grand Ronde, where our tribe is located, just west of Salem, about 20 miles in between the coast and Salem, and got a interdisciplinary degree in social sciences, looked at University of Idaho and got a certificate program over there in fire management, ecology and technology. And so last 20 years or so, I've been working here at the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde in our Natural Resources Department, and kind of worked my way through the technician level and doing wildland fire up to supervisor role, engine boss, crew boss, kind of rolled into more of the incident commander type 4, burn boss, prescribed burn boss type 2. And then a couple years ago, moved into the silviculture fire protection program manager role, and just about 10 weeks ago, stepped into this interim natural resource director role. And so things have been moving kind of fast for me here recently, and I appreciated Don's quote of tribal leaders not receiving much thanks. Starting to get into that world a little bit and find out what that's all about. So really enjoying this opportunity. So today I would like to present to you guys some information from the Grand Ronde's perspective on fire to landscape and prescribed fire as a land management tool. I think a lot of people in this group understands and knows what silviculture is. It's the cultivation, like Don mentioned, the control of the young forest, a lot of reforestation, stand management. And then on the fire protection side, that's the typical, you know, we're protecting the forest from wildland fire, whether natural or man-caused. One thing that I have kind of a different view on is I like looking at fire protection as the portion of using fire to protect the land. Kind of that opposite view where we're not just using fire or protecting our forest from fire and destruction and things like that, but actually using fire as a tool to help manage our landscapes. Jump over here to the next slide. All right. So introduction is, you know, what is prescribed fire? How did Grand Ronde get into prescribed control fire? One thing that I'm always learning is that prescribed fire is owned by suppression. Suppression has all the resources, they have a lot of the training, they have a lot of the expertise, they have the engines, they have the ability, but prescribed fire lacks a lot of that that we've found. And so Grand Ronde, we got into wildland fire fighting back in the early 90s with just a single type 6 engine. We partnered with our local national forest, which is the Siuslaw National Forest, and we started doing multi-agency 20-person crews. In the early 2000s, we picked up a couple more type 6 engines, and we continued to build our capacity over the last 10 or 15 years in building not just our suppression side of our firefighting, but also the prescribed fire. But in order to have that prescribed fire arm or branch of our program, we had to build up our capacity in the wildland fire suppression side. Since, like I mentioned earlier, that suppression seems to own that. That's where you get your experience. That's where you get your qualifications. That's where you get those opportunities. So throughout the 21st century in the 2000s, we started creating a name for ourselves in the fire world, getting out on doing our own type 2 initial attack hand crew, doing our own fleet of type 6 engines, 4 to 5 of those going out, We started participating with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on refuge burns within the Willamette Valley to restore habitat and remove invasive plants and species. Then it started moving more into the Willamette National Forest, into more of our ceded lands area, and on meadow restoration for bear grass and for resources and conifer encroachment to help those opportunities. And with this, our group started gaining and building that capacity and building that experience, and our qualifications and building those networks through partnerships. And with all of that, we created these networks through the Northwest Wildland Fire community. We've always used fire in Grand Ronde, but it's always been this industrial side of it. It's always been for the use of removing logging slash left behind after timber harvest, or mostly pile burning and with a few broadcast burns on steeper slopes. But at the end of the day, it was to site prep a unit for reforestation for the next coming years. With Grand Ronde not using herbicides in our to control invasives in our forestry programs, we have found that fire is by far our best tool. You can see here in our couple of our photos I have on there, see some of our key fire group before we're doing a prescribed burn, and then you can see some burning on our actual reservation and some of our elk meadows there. Jump over to the next slide. I mentioned networking and building partnerships as one of our key components in prescribed fire for the Grand Ronde. One of our first projects and partners has been with the Oregon State Park and Recs Department. Shampooey State Heritage Park is a location that is very important to the Grand Ronde people, and it's was a local gathering location for cultural events and other activities that had happened there. And when we were asked to possibly participate, we definitely jumped at that opportunity. And the more we got involved in this project, the more we realized Grand Ronde was going to be the only resource and only partner on this project conducting the prescribed fire. And so we were able to reach out to a lot of our already created network and partners, and we were able to conduct this 40-acre burn, which was implemented all by Grand Ronde employees. And we're hoping to reduce that fire return interval that had been here, which had been over 30 plus years since fire had been introduced to this area. And you can see in the photos there, it's a lot of just agricultural type land, flat. It's been a lot of non-native grasses in there. And so after we were able to burn this, we were able to come back in the next year and work with the State Parks and Rec Department to do outplantings that we were able to use plant materials that we grow here at Grand Ronde. We have a native plant materials program. And so we were able to put our plants that our people have blessed and put those back into the ground there. And seeing that process and that cycle happen has to have been one of my greatest experiences in my professional career so far. We were able to conduct it just between us and the Parks and Rec service there, and it worked out very well. Like I said, we were hoping to remove those invasives. I wish I had some photos of the what it looks like. And today, this was done in late 2019, so we're just about a year and a half removed from this. And yeah, I'm really excited to get some more photos on that side and see what it actually looks like now at the after. Let me see here. One thing I wanted to just mention here is shampooey. The word actually comes from the Kalapuya language, which means edible root. So yampa is one of our edible roots that we use and we grow here at our native plant nursery, and we were able to put our yampa back into the ground, which is a native carrot. And so, yeah, we're super excited about those opportunities. And here I'd like to share something that where we're doing some prescribed fire within our reservation on our trust land. And we have approximately about 10,000 acres of reservation, and about out of those 10,000 acres, we have about 100 acres of elk meadows dedicated to that. We've partnered with the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation, and have received funding opportunities over a 5-year, and we've been able to implement some fire and return reduce some of the fire return intervals to these lands. We're working on trying to have these lands, these meadows burned every 3 to 5 years. They haven't seen fire since the day that they were harvested and decided to be turned back over to more of a meadow instead of just returning right back to a tree farm. So some of the important things that have happened due to some of this firing in our elk meadows is we've seen a huge return of elk returning back to this habitat. It's very important for hunting access for elders and our tribal community. I think a lot of people know that in the Northwest Oregon and the Coast Range, it's a very thick brush. And so having these open areas creates those opportunities for tribal members to be successful in their hunting, which is a big thing for us. It provides a lot of opportunity and resources that weren't available to us 20 or 30 years ago. So again, another big objective that we're trying to accomplish here using prescribed fire in these meadows is to actually remove the encroaching conifers and invasive plants, and then coming back in and reseeding these with native grasses and forbs from our native plant materials program. And so we've kind of get into this area where my wildland firefighters are now becoming more prescribed fire specialists, and we're almost getting away from this forestry industrial complex of fire can only be used to remove logging / to bring back more trees. And I feel like this culture shift has been occurring recently in Grand Ronde over the last 5 to 10 years, that it's almost this like restoration effort that is really picking up momentum. And we kind of have a joke around here is we have our team restoration, where there's like myself, our native plant nursery supervisor, our natural resource specialist, and restoration ecologist. We just keep going in circle and coming up with new projects, new ground, new areas to continue to put fire or introduce good fire back to it that has the areas that haven't seen fire in many years. So it's been a really neat time to be a part of Grand Ronde Fire Program, and being a part of this is we're just seeing so many opportunities, whether it's networking or whether it's partnering with other tribes or other state agencies or even county or municipalities. It seems like the momentum is, I guess it's just ripe right now. It's just everything that we can do to get that good fire on the ground. It's getting to the point where I'm almost having to turn down opportunities till I can build up our capacity more to continue to put good fire in the Willamette Valley and within our ceded lands. Over here are one of our last slides. You know, what is the future of prescribed fire in Grand Ronde? Where does this Grand Ronde go from here? You know, today is one of these. We're trying to share our story through outreach and partnerships and social media. We want to continue to train our employees to carry out these restoration type burns. We want to, like I said, move away from some of this industrial complex that fire can only be applied to recently harvested units. We want to get to that point where we're conducting cultural burns and that have this restoration effort behind it. And then also just sharing to continue to seek our funding opportunities so we can continue to put good fire on the ground. One area that we're really focusing on within the Grand Ronde tribal community has been education. Just with doing prescribed fire and getting it down more in the community and out of the woods and the forest itself, people are interested in it. They want to know what's going on. They want to see. Fire attracts people. It's like the moth to the flame somewhat. And people want to know what's going on. And so we're getting so much more interest since we're doing even just small burns within the community, 1 or 2 acres. They're just seeing that, and it's gaining more interest. And so yeah, that's where I'm at right now. That's one of my big goals, is just this outreach, get this information out to people that we are doing some good work out here. And we're always looking for partnerships and opportunities. So I always just want to extend that out to everybody, is you'll be able to have my contact information from this. And yeah, I welcome those opportunities, and we'll see how that all goes and pans out, but I'm excited for it. And this is where I think I take any questions or any opportunities for anything that people may have, or go from there.
Thank you, Colby. This is really a nice presentation. I really like the view of how fire changed the cultural shift. And in some ways, I can't speak for everybody else in the summit, but for me, that's the kind of view, that cultural shift that we hope to apply to other aspects of forestry as well here. So we had some questions, and they're really related to the interface of silviculture and fire. One of them is whether you can manage all weeds with fire, or whether you have found that some weeds are better managed with fire than others.
Yeah, so one of our big invasive plants is whether it's Scotch broom. Scotch broom is the bane of my existence for right now. Is trying. A lot of times we take on new lands or new projects that have been, the land has been degraded or hasn't been managed for decades. And so a lot of times that comes with Scotch broom, Himalayan blackberries, other non-native vegetation that we'd like to remove in order to get our native plants back in there. So yeah, I found that Scotch broom is probably one of the things that fire doesn't quite just knock out. It's got a huge seed bank. It's very difficult to remove and continue to bring in new plants. But at that, I would say fire has been a huge bonus on certain plants, such as like the Himalayan blackberry, other things along those lines that we really just can't get in and manage. And having that opportunity to have fire as a tool has been very successful for us. But yeah.
So another question, again, sticking with the silviculture theme. You talked about elk meadows, but how does it interface with other aspects of silviculture? Like if you have partial harvesting system, you really carry the fire into the forest with that and integrate it as part of your silviculture package beyond the open, meadow type burns?
Yeah. And I think we're getting more of those opportunities and getting away from that, more of that industrial, and doing some understory burns. We have a really awesome project coming up where we've done some thinning near some of our powwow grounds and some of our more down into the communities. And I think those are the opportunities where we can do, light burning, understory burning. They're through, 30-year-old stands. And so we have those opportunities where we're opening up the canopy. We want to get light down to the ground level. And that's where I think we can bring in some fire and just do some of that carrying through, whether it's, light hand piling or anything like that. But yeah, I think there's some more opportunity there. And I know there's a lot more opportunity when we start moving farther east into the Willamette Valley and looking at like the oak prairie opportunities that we usually burn with the Fish and Wildlife Services. I mean, that's typically what we're doing when we're working with them, is doing those oak understory burns and helping carry that through. So.
Okay. This is the last question. You need to keep it short to stay on time, but people ask about private landowners. Of course, there's some fear to overcome with private landowners, probably liabilities. And how can they get involved if they're interested in applying fire? Do you have any guidance?
Yeah, we partner with the Natural Resource Conservation Services, NRCS. They have a wetland mitigation program, I believe, and through the NRCS. And so there has been a lot of issues going on within the Willamette Valley. We've been dealing with it a lot, is just liability. Who wants to take on that liability? Is it the burn boss, myself, writing the burn plan? Is it the burn boss out on the ground who's implementing the burn plan? Is it the landowner taking that on too? So that's a big discussion right now. I'm in a lot of different cohorts or committees and groups that are trying to figure that out. Who takes on the liability to conduct prescribed fire on private ground? And because it's needed, that's an area that we really need to get good fire on. So I feel like we're working through that process right now. At the end of the day, I think some discussion needs to happen along the lines of the burn boss having personal insurance and those kind of things, and what that looks like, or maybe the company or the tribe that's running this will, step up and back that person and take on that liability, and have that understanding that sometimes things can go wrong, but knowing that having that person in the background and the experience, that you're applying your best tribal ecological knowledge, you're using the best science available to you, and trying to minimize those impacts. So.
Well, thank you. We have more questions, but in the interest of staying on time, Don, you want to introduce Phil, and we move to the third part.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colby. Thank you, Klaus. Our next speaker is Phil Rigdon. And as I mentioned before, Phil is the Deputy Director of Natural Resources with the YAKAMA Nation. So please join me in welcoming Phil. You are on. Looks good. I think you just have to unmute and you're ready.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, Phil.
All right, and thanks, Don, and I really do appreciate this opportunity to come and talk about this. Actually, before I took the job that I'm currently in, I helped the tribe 638 contract the fields program, and so I started my career fighting fire, but also the fields activities and the prescribed fire on the reservation is a very important part of the things that I've done. So I'm grateful for this. And so why don't we go into this? Just so folks know, Yakama Nation, we're located in South Central Washington, about a 1.34 million acre reservation. But our ceded territory extends over 11 million acres, as well as our UNA areas that we practice and to gather foods, to hunt, fish, and those kind of things. So this is all the different tribes that make up the YAKAMA Nation. There were 14 confederated tribes and bands that make us up. But I wanted to get into kind of, I've got a big presentation, but a lot of it is pictures. So I made sure of that. We got about 650,000 acre forest, rangeland, and then the lower valley where the ag and a lot of our people live. And so the historic conditions, the reservation and the upper elevations, our people would burn off the land. And this is a Potato Hill shot, I believe, back a long time ago. But the use of fire was a big tool in how our ancestors and those kind of things that shaped the land. And you can see that, we're East Cascade forest with precipitation that gets about, 70 to 80 inches of rain on the crest all the way down to less than 10 through certain parts. And so the diversity of our forests and our land is pretty unique. And it's also a great and beautiful place, but that, and Mount Adams, or Pato is what we call it, is right there. To understand kind of, we did timber types back in the 1930s, and they're pretty simple timber types, but this kind of shows what our forest looked like back. It was open ponderosa pine stands, the savanna type of stands. But because of, past logging practice, grazing practices, and fire exclusion, true firs and different fir species came up underneath and changed where the pine stands became more mixed conifer up into 1997. And through this, it led to a lot of forest health problems. In the early 90s, there was a drought series that came through, and we had a western spruce budworm outbreak through the landscape. And we had, thousands of acres that were severely impacted by the budworm, where we're losing. And we came through and we harvested it, reducing the risk of insect disease, but also the risk of landscape fires and those kind of things. And it was an important part of our approach to management. In 2003, I actually worked with the tribe to take over the fields program. So the tribe's what we call 638 contract. And for a lot of you guys to understand, a tribe could take over the responsibility of a federal program if they show the capacity and the ability to do that. And so we did in 2003. And so our goal was to look at the impacts from logging, grazing, fire suppression, and use different treatment types to go about and how we manage our forests. And you know what was our program goals? It was a whole series of things, and you could see them with, you know, what we're doing. But a lot of it is to protect our natural resources, protect the integrity and the things that value, and using prescribed burn to help create the type of land and forest that our people want, and how we approach things. And so here's a map, and just like if you see in the years, you know, over the landscape we have, but these were some of the big prescribed burns that we did in 2019. And so we've done a series of projects. We do some hand piling, and we burn the piles during the wintertime, but also broadcast burning is a pretty important tool into the things. And so, you know, we label HFR, but this is some of the hand piles that were out there during the summertime. This all turns, and this is more of that type of activity. But also we follow up some of our timber cells with burning to take out some of and prep the land for reforestation after some of our timber cells. And so in 2005, we did this burn in Lost Horse and replanted it, and now we got a pretty decent stands that come in. We also burn and do it through the whole different type of forest types, and it's an important part of the activities that are happening on the reservation. We do a bunch of fields and fire activities. There's a big Russian olive outbreak down a bunch of our watersheds, trying to reduce and remove those. We're challenged with cheatgrass and how to work on some of those things. We're not as successful in some of those programs as we'd like to, but it's also where all the homes are and the biggest risk. And we've had fires where we've had large losses of home. The city of White Swan in 2009 we lost, you know, many structures during a fire that happened in a February event, 70-mile-an-hour winds. But the most important part is we're actively out there, and we're doing activities such as landscape burning to the best that we can, trying to reduce and using the tools in the toolbox. And it's pretty cool to see the type of thing. And this is more pictures, but we also, it needs to be treated, the forest, and some folks have been on trips on this have seen our approach on a landscape level, but we're trying to reduce the insect and disease, reduce the spacing, get the growth of the current forest into the way that we want. And so it's an important part of YAKAMA and harvesting timber, but also part of our goals to make sure that we're maintaining. And we're one of the last tribes that actually has a mill, so the economy for the timber side is important also in our thing. But it's a mix between trying to maintain that. We're striving for using fire in a manner that will be burning on the ground and will add to the ecological processes versus what we've seen. This was a 1994 lake beds fire. It burned about 5,000 acres on the reservation. And so, but that's the thing that climate change and those kind of things, and just fire activity has gotten so drastic these last years. In 2013, 26,000 acres fire happened. 20,000 of it was on the reservation. And it had a big impact and if you go over Highway 97 coming over to Yakima Valley, you'll see that we're still living with the consequences of that fire. And those conditions continue to happen. A couple of years later, we had a lightning storm come through and hit some of our dead lodgepole stands, and boom, we pretty much had a 50,000 acre fire, but 40,000 of it came across the reservation and had big impact to us. And also Forest Service, state, DNR, and you know, we salvaged 17,800 acres, and we're still working on restoration on many of these areas as we continue to try to address those things that we saw. And so just to get a view, this is the crew of some of the burning. The bottom left was 1994 fire where we planted, but it's also a good picture of the fire on our landscape. And fire has always played a role, and fire continues to be a dynamic part. This is a forest development crew. I just got to show some pictures of the crew, but I wanted to also get into some important conversations, protecting and enhancing our foods from PFI to which is, you know, one of our bitter roots, to Wiwanu, which is called huckleberry, and many of the tamash is choke cherries, and many of our other foods that our people gather, that they're dependent upon this. And you look back on some of this is Potato Hill back in 1905, around that time. This is where our members, for since I grew up all the way through the 90s, I grew up, we would go and pick huckleberries. And some of the fire that we saw in 2015, we're hoping we'll see similar areas that have huckleberries come back through some of them. And we're doing some analysis for that to prepare. But, you know, it's an important part. Our people have been across this land. This food is recognized in ceremony. It's a part of not just our culture, but our way of life, our connection to these places. The stories and legends on the land are this. And there's a unique relationship that I'll get into as we go down to there. But I think it's important to see and understand, you know, when we talk about huckleberries, what's it about? And what we continue, this is practices that our people continue today. And it's an important part of who we are. But we also see that trees are coming in through all these areas, but the tree production is great, but it's not really necessarily good for the berries, and they start disappearing. And so these areas have been maintained through the use of fire and the tools in the toolbox for that. And so we're out there, we're thinning and trying to open up these areas and using fire as a tool. And I think that's an important part. And it's not just here on the reservation. Our tribe, we have unique relationships with Gifford Pinchot and Okanagan Wenatchee. And we participate in different collaboratives, the Taposh Collaborative, which, just for people to understand, Taposh means pine tree, and Itchishkin, which is our language. And so that collaborative is we're part of that. We're other partnerships, and this is a really important one. The Gifford Pinchot is we go and have helped them burn certain huckleberry grounds, and we've helped do projects with the Gifford Pinchot, and we're doing tests to see what is the best approach. You know, not getting the full blown out fires, but also looking at small scale. How can we do things? And we have one of our young, our not young, he's my age, but he's getting his forestry degree in studying huckleberries and studying the tools that we can do to restore. And so we're trying some unique things that I think are pretty cool, and it's exciting to see that. But it's the relationship and that partnership that is really important as we do these activities and the approaches that we do. Also, you know, our tribe, we just tribal council, we started with the adaptation plan, but we just passed an updated action plan. What are the activities that we can do to take care of the resources that our people depend upon? And I think it's an important part of this dynamic in this conversation. When you go back and you see, you know, the pictures of the 2015 fire, the Cougar Creek fire, yeah, you know, that shocked us. We treated those lands right, but those fires, they did not care. They destroyed, you know, a lot of areas I never thought would burn in that manner. And that's the scary part that we need to. You're starting to see fires on the west side over in COLBY's area. And that's a unique thing that is coming our way. And so as we talk about climate, I think it's an important thing. But to get back to who we are, you know, you look on this lower left picture, you know, a lot of our land looks like this, and we go and we thin and we continue to manage our forests. But it is the, you know, Pato, the mountain overlooking us into what we're doing, the winter and the role of the fireplace and this lower right fire. I remember we were burning, it was in Buck Camp, and I still laugh with the crew and that fire. Sorry about that. I still laugh at the crew because when you saw the column of smoke, are you sure it's still in the lines? Fire is a challenging part of how we do this. But the thing is that I think that's what tribes are really good at, and where we are trying to step forward through the collaborative process to see what role we could play in helping the Forest Service and state and other folks do similar things. And I did not dive into other culture burns such as, we have in some of the wetlands and wildlife, we have tules, and tules are a very traditional part of our ceremonies. And we burn off, it's a bunch of the tules after they've gone old, and they refurbish. And so it helps with the aquatic, and ducks and other species like that. So I just wanted to go, I kind of gave a lot of pictures, but I wanted to make sure that, Don gave me 15 minutes, so I was trying to stay within target. And so I appreciate this opportunity. I hope this gives a good overview of Yakama Nation's approach to fire, but also you guys get a glimpse of the beauty of our reservation and the resources and how we try to approach it. Any questions?
Thank you, Phil. This is really nice. And so we have some questions. The first one, actually, when you introduce fire into areas that haven't burnt for a while, do those native plants, especially those associated with your first food, come back on their own, or do you facilitate that by seeding? And how long after a fire do you see the benefits showing up?
So some of the things are unique, and it depends on area. One of the real important parts that I thought was really, really cool and unique for us was when we burned off this area where there was a bunch of pine, and there was about a half inch of pine needles. And when that burned off, then 2 years later, we saw a bunch of foods and medicines out there that we hadn't seen in these areas in a long time. And so we got feedback from some of our traditional elders, the ladies of the Longhouse, and they were pretty impressed. They were, you guys got to do more of this. And so as we do this, I think you build the database and the knowledge onto that. We've also had where we've created, brush fields off of some of our burning with some chaparral type of stuff that has come in. And so I think timing plays a key role in conditions and when you burn. So if you burn too hot, you could end up with some nitrogen fixing plants and also elevation. And so as you learn, I think our skills will become a lot better on how we do things.
Actually, you just set the stage for another question. It asks about the timing of fires, from the Western point of view versus the traditional use of fire. Is there any difference, or how do you deal with that?
So there's a lot of different readings and everything. Most of the time right now we're burning in the fall time, and part of that is it's resource protection too. The systems are so out of whack, and if we lose a fire, we don't want to lose 20, 30,000 acres. And so trying to maintain that, but also some of the driving factors, because our people spring burned but in the fall time, after people pick berries, there's legends and stories that you hear from some, that even some written in books that talk about our members would ride horses. The young kids would learn how to ride their horses up in the mountains and building fire trail. And so when they got done running that trail, they would go back and riding their horse around the trail. And after they've done it for, a month or so, different folks, then as our people were leaving an area, they would light it off. And I don't know if nobody watched the fire lines, everybody got the heck out of there, but that's part of our stories. And the timing would probably be, late, middle of September to sometime in October is my understanding. And so there, we have that connection to the past and those things. And I think that's an important part. But timing is something that we're talking to folks. And when we talk to our culture program and those things, we want to try to expand out and do more first food type of burns for some of our roots that sometimes look challenging. But we got to be careful. I don't want to get our elders or ladies of the Longhouse too upset before on some of those too. So,
well, thank you. I want to thank all three presenters. This has been a really nice introduction and the different cultures and the use of fire. There was one question, I know we don't have time for that, got to move on, but there was a question about follow-up resources. I think I can point to the Mighty Network, we'll follow up with that. And I guess I can make one more pitch for Robin Kimmerer's book, Braden Sweetgrass. That's about, at least for me, one of the most impressive books. And my wife is a little bit upset. It was actually a present for her. I marked it up so much for the stuff I wanted to use for my class that she now decides it's my book. But thank you again. We'll switch to Colleen to go to the breakout rooms.
Thanks, everybody. Those were awesome presentations. Please stick around and converse in some small breakout groups that we're going to divide up into now. This is where the meat of the discussion happens. We can hear what your thoughts are, what your questions are, where you think you can integrate some of this or where you've seen it playing out already in your area. So in a minute, we're going to go into breakout rooms. A few pieces of important information before we do that. We've created a shared Google Doc to record notes from your breakout groups on. It is all in one Google Doc. So I wanted to just share this here and show you that breakout group 1 is here, breakout group 2 is here, 3 is here. So you're going to get a great big Google Doc, and it's just page after page of the same exact thing. You'll see your breakout group number when you are invited into a group. And so just find the corresponding header on a page for your breakout group, and you can take notes in that page. You don't have to worry about staying on one page. You can spill over onto the next if you like. Just make sure you're in your breakout group. Also, an important note on this is we can't have 170 people all in one shared Google Doc. So if you would please, we're going to put the link to this shared Google Doc in the chat. And if you would wait to link to it until you're in your group and decide who is the note taker. And then if just the note takers could open the Google Doc and start to document in there, that would be really helpful. Then the Google Doc sharing will work and everything should go smoothly. And just a couple more notes, keep this fun, keep it casual. All your comments in here that are documented, we're going to take a look at, share in the community. It'll help us better know what sort of direction thoughts and comments and ideas are leaning in our Mighty Network for the future. And your presence is valued however it looks here. So if you want to share in your small group, great. If you want to listen in your small group, great. It's great if not all of you just listen, obviously. But if somebody can be a timekeeper, somebody can be a note taker, and give everybody a chance to speak if they wish, but no pressure. We'll come back here at 40 minutes after, is it? Help me out, guys. Yeah, at 40 minutes after the hour, we will come back. So once you're settled in your groups, check the time, and we'll give you 5-minute and 1-minute time warnings too in your groups to come back. And then we'll do some report outs when we return. So I think Shannon's gonna get the breakout room Google Doc link is in the chat right now. That should carry over to your small groups. So open it once you're in there, and we'll be assigning groups now.
Family forester in the Northern Oregon Coast Range, and I'm joined by Greg Edel from the University of Washington. And part of our job is to figure out how do we wind this thing up before we all run off to dinner. And before moving on, as I think you might wonder, like, how does this ever work? I'm quite amazed by this. So the phrase, ignore the person behind the curtain, we shouldn't ignore the person behind the curtain, who is Shannon Murray, who's done a terrific job of twisting the wires together and somehow making this happen. So special thanks to you, Shannon. So we can imagine if we were in a room all together, how we might wind this up. That of course, then we would have report out from the groups, and we we know that that wouldn't quite work. We have 15 groups, each reporting for 10 seconds or something like that. So we're not going to do that. So we're going to do something that might be sort of an in-between. And one is to ask you in the chat to take a minute to type in, if you have, say, 1 to 3 words about thoughts and feelings that for you kind of sum up what you've taken away from today. We'd encourage you to do that, and we'll grab that and put that on the Mighty Networks, and so that the conversation will carry on, which is important both in terms of content and the spirit of becoming a community working on this. So Greg and I are going to do a little back and forth. We've been snooping in on your Google documents and just kind of highlight a few things. And one that I'll start with is the opportunity we have right now, given the amount of fire that happened this past year in the Northwest. And so the public is much more aware of fire in general. And there's a challenge here to have them distinguish between good fire and not so good fire. So it seems like maybe capturing this moment in our history to focus people's energy into ongoing learning about fire. But Greg, what do you have?
Well, I wanted to point out something in group 3 that was working with the concept between thinking of the language and the way that the language that's used in describing forest management and talking about forest management is connected to sort of not only the knowledge of the land, but then also how we think about maybe a diversity of management approaches as well. So I found that to be kind of an interesting way of taking what we started with Don's talk and sort of putting it within the broader context of this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation that's happening at many levels and in most organizations.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, another one that I picked up that I saw surface in multiple groups was the value of learning over time. That this, in some ways, if we're dealing with climate issues, we don't have the time we would like to have, but that this idea of both learning over time as individuals figure out how to return good fire back to the landscape, but also the value of learning together. So learning over time and across space, but also amongst different groups. And we saw that really highlighted. So that was one that I saw pop up in a number of groups.
Yeah, one thing that comes out from looking at, by the way, this is almost like a play-by-play for a sportscast, but we're looking at notes in a Google Drive. How bizarre is that? But the amount of time that people put into the first question and sort of making that connection and trying to understand where everybody was coming from is super critical in all these kinds of conversations. And I don't know that we've had enough time, or the groups have had enough time to sort of mingle in the space of ideas that they would like to perhaps. The one that I'm going to point to now is from group 6 and thinking about sort of the challenges of trying to integrate this notion of doing more fire-related management on land and pulling that into what's happening on other land ownerships. Specifically, there was mention of federal lands and how to coordinate between sort of maybe these tribal lands and federal lands.
Another one that I came up with that again surfaced, I think, in several groups was when people were talking about what new awareness the talks created for them. And I noticed a couple of comments about the relationship between forest stewardship activities and food, and just realizing how important that is to so many people, both indigenous and non-indigenous. And so I kind of like that sign of the success of this event, of how do we keep expanding all of our understandings and then figuring out, well, what are we going to do with that?
In group 2, they talked a bit about the Yakult burn and sort of its importance in setting up the structure, but also sort of resetting the stand structure for a really large area. And I was kind of struck by the fact that, Phil was showing some large fires, maybe it was 4,000 or 5,000 acres on parts of their land that were clearly resetting events as well, and seemed to match at some level some resetting events that you could see within the old photographs. And so I wonder some about what this connection is between the sort of the natural, really sort of really intense fires that we really don't want, but maybe how common and important they might have been on the landscape.
Great. And before giving my next one, is it the dilemma of knowing you each, I know so many of you, and knowing you each have so much to offer. So it's like being close to being a thirsty person next to a drink of water and not being able to have it. So we're doing the best we can with this, but I think for me, it's sort of an appetizer for saying, let's get together and let's carry these conversations on down the road. So we work with the tools we've got. So I've got two more, Greg, but one is I noticed a notes focused on this challenge of how to do the best possible job of drawing on traditional ecological knowledge while also blending that with more Western scientific knowledge. I probably don't have the lingo right, but it seems like we're at a really interesting point in time where they both have important insights to help us understand where we are and where we want to go and how we're going to get there. But this ongoing dance of acknowledging the importance of both and figuring out how do you responsibly integrate those. I saw that come up in a couple spots. But what else do you have, Greg?
Not much. I'm running out of capacity here. One thing that came up in, let's see, this is Breaker Group 5. They sort of have an overarching theme of looking at sort of this relationship between fire culture and sort of the importance of biophysical and social components of being able to have a fire culture and what that might mean for differences in management going forward.
Mm-hmm. And the last one that I'll share is I was, as I mentioned, interested in looking for evidence of aha moments. And again, a couple places that came up, this idea of what are the pros and cons of looking at the landscape from the point of view of ecosystem services versus service to the ecosystems. A number of groups brought that up, and I think that's going to be sort of a theme because yes, they're words, but the words reflect how we think and how we feel and ultimately how we act in relationship to land. So my feeling is we had all sorts of rich conversations and we're going to do what we can to migrate these pieces over into the mighty network and figure out how do we keep the conversation going. And as a segue, I'm gonna in a minute turn it back to Don and to Klaus, but I like returning to a point, Don, that you made, was this idea of the value of common memory being created. And though this is a humble beginning with wires twisted together, I like to believe that in the last 2 hours that we've made a few steps in that direction of figuring out how do we create this common memory and how do we use that to help us continue the good work that all of us are doing across the landscape. So thank you all for being such great sports in this adventure. And with that, I'll turn it over to Don, who is going to offer sort of closing thoughts and pull together things he'd like to share to wind up a day that he's put a huge amount of work into coordinating. So thank you, Don, for doing that. And then it will turn to Klaus, who will head us on towards day 2, and then we'll head off to supper. So thank you.
Thank you. I guess appreciate everybody's thoughts and trying to gather folks' many thoughts just for in a few rooms. That when I saw this originate, it was kind of mind blowing. How could we get people's thoughts to get together, and then the group says, Don, you summarize them all in the end. Okay, do it at near 6 o'clock after being triple booked for the day, and sure. But I guess one of the things that of the common memory is this is kind of a significant event. Today is a significant event, and thankful that the group thought of this coming next 2 days now that out of the 10 presentations, that 5 out of the 10 are tribal presentations, and that's what I'm the cat's yaya to the group of allowing our tribal community to share our memory and what we can create as a common community to go forward, and maybe having this network as a place to share this community, this common, the mighty networks will become a mighty community memory as a theme coming out. And I guess, I think we did talk about, was climate change going to come up? And I guess it certainly did. And that was one thing I was happy to see our presenters make that. And I know our community made that, but there's so many opportunities for more presentations and getting together in the future. But we have 2 more days, and there are 2 more. Each day we'll have a tribal presentation, and now we'll be hearing the other communities or folks share their perspectives with what things we learned today, and it's great to have the chat, being able to save the chat, record it. That's what I'm anxious to hit the save button here and read it all. I'm going to take a long walk. A great day to take a walk. Thank goodness that we have a great day to go take a walk after this, and then have something to eat. But that's what I'm thankful for, Katsialia. Thankful for this and all the thoughts that were shared today. So I guess to Klaus for the wrap up.
Yes, thanks, Don, and especially for, you helped putting this all together on that. And from my point of view, I feel this has been a real privilege to learn today, and looking back at what just happened in the 2 hours, all I can say is, wow, this has been really impressive, at least for me, and from some of the comments I see for everybody else as well. And so, as Peter already hinted, it seems like there's really room for discussion, there's room for innovation, there's room for novelty, and we're going to carry it forward the next few days. So as you now go home, I will bicycle home, and then I'm going to have a brew, which actually would be the ideal way to keep our conversation going. But I encourage you to reflect on the day and think about what are some of the ideas that sparked your interest, which ones resonated, which ones were challenging for you, and which ones do you think you can roll into your day-to-day operation next time you make a decision about properties or about woods, or maybe about your life in general on that. And so keep that in mind as we roll that forward. So we'll, as Don already pointed out, this theme and a lot of the ideas we just heard will carry through the next days, and hopefully through the discussion down the line as we move forward. So I want to share this screen here, and if you can see now my transition for tomorrow. Is my screen up on that? So tomorrow we'll talk about forestry that goes beyond timber, so to speak. We're looking at multiple revenue streams or multiple ownership goals, and how those kind of can be accommodated in our current forest sector structure, and how we can move things forward and utilizing those multiple revenue streams. So I guess I don't want to really bring it down to money per se, but utilizing the opportunities there that we have to develop a forestry that is ecologically sound, socially responsible, and economically feasible. So with that, I think we are 3-4 minutes early, but anybody wants to make some last comments? Otherwise, we can stop and take an early break. Yes. Well, in that case, I don't see any. I don't have access to the, turns out, to the chat room. So Feel free to follow up. Please send emails to us. Be there tomorrow. Be prepared tomorrow to chat, ask questions, communicate in breakout rooms again. Thank you. Good evening. On that, be safe. See you tomorrow.